My family stole my inheritance until the old will was found. When my father died, I thought the worst pain I would ever feel was losing him. I was wrong. The real nightmare began when my own family sat across from me, looked me in the eyes, and told me I had been cut out of his will. Everything, the house, the land, the savings, gone. Signed away. Rewritten. Erased. They said it was his final wish. They said I wasn't there enough. They said I should accept it. And for months, I believed them. Until a forgotten storage unit, covered in dust and silence, revealed something they never expected anyone to find: an old will. A different will. One that told a completely different story. What followed wasn't just a legal battle. It was the unraveling of lies, forged signatures, buried resentment, and a betrayal so deep it shattered what I thought family meant. This isn't just a story about inheritance. It's a story about greed hiding behind grief. About how easily love can be rewritten. And about the piece of paper that exposed the truth they tried to bury with my father. The first layer is loud. Public. Performative. People hugging you. Whispering apologies for your loss. Telling you he was a good man. The second layer is private. It's when everyone leaves. The house felt different the morning after the funeral. Not just empty, rearranged. As if my father's absence had shifted the architecture itself. I stood in the hallway outside his bedroom and stared at the indentation on his pillow. I didn't go inside. I wasn't ready to see the room without him in it. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a folder open. He had always been the organized one. The planner. The executor. Even in grief, he seemed purposeful. I mistook that for strength. Looking back, I realized it might have been something else. Preparation. My mother sat quietly with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Her eyes were red, but dry. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. There's a strange moment after death where reality hasn't fully settled. You still feel like the person is nearby. Like they might interrupt the silence. That morning, I thought the worst part of losing my father would be missing him. I didn't know I was about to lose something else too. The lawyer's office was small, warm, controlled. A place built for measured conversations. I remember noticing how Daniel sat straight-backed, composed. His breathing was even. I, on the other hand, couldn't get comfortable. My hands were cold. My knee bounced under the table. When the lawyer began reading, I felt my chest tighten instinctively. Not from fear of money, but from fear of what the document would say about love. Because wills aren't just financial documents. They are emotional verdicts. I leave the entirety of my estate to my eldest son, Daniel. Time didn't stop. It narrowed. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Entirety. The word repeated itself in my head. Entirety means total. Complete. No remainder. No remainder for me. I waited for clarification. An explanation. A letter attached. There was none. Daniel nodded slightly. Not surprised. Not shocked. Just confirming. And in that moment, something inside me fractured, not financially, but psychologically. Because inheritance isn't about wealth. It's about worth. That night, I approached my mother carefully. Did Dad mention change the will? She avoided eye contact. He felt you weren't around much. The statement wasn't cruel. It was calm, which made it more powerful. Daniel joined in. You chose your job over being here. The framing was subtle. Not accusation, comparison. Not theft, fairness. Suddenly, I wasn't a victim. I was someone who had fallen short. And here's what betrayal does when it comes from family. It rewrites your memory. I began replaying moments from the past year. The time I missed a Sunday visit. The holiday I arrived late. The work call I took during dinner. Each memory grew heavier in hindsight. Maybe they were right. Maybe love is measured in proximity. Maybe sacrifice is counted in physical presence. I started questioning my own narrative. That's how psychological manipulation works. It doesn't force you to believe something. It makes you doubt yourself until you choose to believe it. Within weeks, Daniel began renovating the house. At first, I told myself it was practical. Then I noticed what he chose to remove. Dad's framed military photo gone. The old clock that chimed every hour replaced. The workshop in the backyard emptied. It felt less like updating, more like cleansing, as if he was stripping the house of shared memory, erasing overlap. The truck Dad and I rebuilt together when I was 16 was sold without discussion. When I asked why, Daniel said, "It makes more sense financially." Financially? Everything had become transactional. And I began noticing something unsettling. Daniel wasn't grieving anymore. He was advancing. And the more I watched him, the more a quiet discomfort settled in my chest. Because grief slows you down. But he seemed accelerated. The storage facility call felt insignificant at first. But when I pulled open that metal door and dust floated into the sunlight, something shifted inside me. The unit smelled like time. Old paper. Rust. Neglect. And there, tucked behind boxes, was the metal lockbox. The envelope inside it had my name written in Dad's handwriting. Not typed. Not printed. Written. Seeing his handwriting did something to me emotionally. It was intimate. Direct. Intentional. My pulse quickened not because I expected money, but because I felt seen. And when I opened it, I realized something else had been buried besides fishing gear and tax forms. Truth. The document was clean. Official. Balanced. 50% to Daniel. 50% to me. Equal. But it wasn't the percentages that broke me. It was the handwritten line at the bottom. My son stand equal in my eyes. That sentence unraveled months of self-doubt. For months, I had carried the quiet belief that maybe I hadn't been enough. Maybe I had disappointed him. But here, in ink, was confirmation that love had not been revoked, which meant something darker. It had been altered. The grief I felt in that moment wasn't for my father. It was for the version of reality I had accepted. Because once you realize you've been deceived, you can't unknow it. Placing both wills side by side felt surreal. The older signature was fluid, spacious. The newer one was tight, compressed, slightly angled. I didn't want to believe it. But I also couldn't ignore it. The forensic examiner confirmed what I feared. High probability of forgery. Forgery means planning. It means someone sat down, studied his signature, practiced it. Forgery is intimate. You have to get close to someone's identity to imitate it. And that realization hurt more than the inheritance itself. Because betrayal requires access. And only family had access. When I confronted Daniel, I expected denial. Instead, I got justification. I stayed. I sacrificed. I deserved more. He didn't see it as theft. He saw it as balancing the scales. Resentment had been quietly accumulating for years. Every hospital visit he attended. Every late-night emergency call. Every moment he felt overlooked. He didn't want equality. He wanted compensation. And my mother's silence during the confrontation was heavier than his words. Because silence, in that moment, was alignment. The betrayal wasn't spontaneous. It was collective. Courtrooms are strange places. Emotion is stripped away. Only facts survive. Medical records showed Dad was heavily medicated. Hospice nurses testified he rarely spoke clearly. The handwriting expert confirmed inconsistencies. Daniel's calm demeanor cracked for the first time under cross-examination. The judge ruled the later will invalid. Equal division restored. Legally I won. Psychologically I felt hollow. Because truth doesn't repair trust. It exposes its absence. After the ruling, silence followed. My mother stopped answering calls. Daniel avoided eye contact in public. Family members chose sides. Justice has a cost. And sometimes that cost is isolation. The house was sold. The money divided. But family dinners never resumed. Months later, I reopened the envelope again. My son stand equal in my eyes. I realized something profound. The real inheritance wasn't the money. It was clarity. The clarity that I had not been forgotten. That I had not been unloved. That someone tried to rewrite my story and failed. Betrayal changes you. But truth rebuilds you. And sometimes, the most valuable thing you inherit is proof that you mattered. Winning in court felt nothing like I imagined. There was no relief. No sense of triumph. No closure. Just silence. The kind of silence that spreads slowly like frost creeping across glass. My mother stopped answering my calls immediately after the verdict. Not angrily. Not dramatically. She simply disappeared. Daniel didn't contact me at all. At first, I told myself they needed time. But time didn't soften anything. It hardened it. Within weeks, I noticed something subtle but deliberate. Extended family members stopped replying to messages. An aunt who used to comment on every photo went quiet. A cousin unfollowed me. It wasn't confrontation. It was erasure. 3 months after the court case ended, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She hesitated when she saw me. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. I'm sorry things got so ugly. I heard you really went after Daniel. Went after. The phrasing told me everything. Somewhere, a story had been rewritten. I wasn't the son who defended his father's wishes. I was the greedy brother who sued his grieving family. And that's the second phase of retaliation. Control the narrative. Daniel couldn't win in court, but he could win socially. He began telling relatives I forced him into legal fees. That I dragged our mother through stress. That I cared more about money than peace. The truth doesn't spread as quickly as emotion. And resentment travels fast. 6 months after the verdict, my mother finally called. Her voice sounded older. Thinner. I hope you're happy, she said quietly. That sentence pierced deeper than any accusation. I tried explaining again calmly that the will had been forged. That the court confirmed it. She didn't argue facts. She argued feelings. You destroyed your brother. Destroyed? As if the forgery had been an accident. As if accountability were cruelty. She never acknowledged what Daniel did. Only what I exposed. And that's when I understood something painful. In some families, harmony is valued more than truth. And the person who disrupts the illusion becomes the villain. The first holiday after the lawsuit, I wasn't invited. No dramatic announcement. No confrontation. Just silence. I saw photos later online. Daniel sitting in Dad's old chair. My mother smiling faintly. The caption read, Family first. I stared at that phrase longer than I should have. Because family first only applies when you comply. If you challenge the system, you become the outsider. I spent that holiday alone in my apartment. Not because I lacked friends, but because grief mixed with betrayal creates a loneliness that feels specific, personal, heavy. I kept wondering if I should have let it go. If the money was worth this fracture. But every time that thought surfaced, another one followed. If I had stayed silent, the lie would have become permanent. And silence would have meant agreeing with it. Publicly, Daniel tried to maintain composure. Privately, things weren't as stable. Probation meant community service. The fraud record limited certain professional opportunities. I heard through mutual contacts that he struggled with anger. Resentment shifted not at himself but at me. He told people I ruined his life. But the truth is, exposure ruins the life built on deception, not the exposure itself. Over time, his social circle narrowed. Trust is fragile. And once someone is labeled dishonest, it lingers. The irony wasn't lost on me. He tried to erase me. Now his own reputation carried a permanent mark. Years passed. We didn't reconcile. My mother aged quickly. Bitterness settled into her posture. Daniel moved to another town eventually. Not dramatically. Just quietly. As if trying to reset. But resentment doesn't reset with geography. It follows you. I often wondered whether he ever regretted it. Not getting caught. But doing it. There's a difference. And that difference determines whether someone grows. Or calcifies. People often ask if I forgave him. Forgiveness is complicated. It isn't forgetting. It isn't excusing. It's deciding whether you want to carry anger forever. For a long time, I carried it. Not loudly, but internally. A tightness in my chest whenever I thought about him. Eventually, I realized something. Holding on to anger tied me to the betrayal. Letting it go didn't mean reconciling. It meant releasing the weight. So I stopped replaying the confrontation. Stopped imagining alternate outcomes. Stopped rehearsing arguments in my head. Peace doesn't require reunion. It requires acceptance. The greatest consequence wasn't financial. It wasn't legal. It wasn't social. It was relational. I lost my brother. I lost the version of my mother I thought I knew. But I gained something too. Clarity. The clarity that love cannot survive where integrity is absent. The clarity that family is not defined by blood, but by behavior. And the clarity that defending truth may cost you connection. But losing truth costs you yourself. 5 years after the court case, I visited Dad's grave alone. I brought the envelope with his handwriting. I sat there quietly, thinking about everything that happened. If he could see what unfolded, would he feel regret? Would he blame himself? Or would he simply be disappointed? I placed my hand on the headstone and whispered, "I didn't fight for the money. I fought for what you meant." The wind moved gently through the trees. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had survived. And sometimes, that's the only inheritance that truly lasts. It had been 7 years. 7 years of silence that became normal. 7 years of birthdays acknowledged privately but never spoken aloud. 7 years of wondering whether I'd ever hear my brother's voice again. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something instinct maybe made me answer. "Hey." I recognized his voice instantly. Daniel. Older. Slower. The sharpness I remembered was gone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It felt like standing in the doorway of a house we both used to live in but no longer owned. "I heard Mom's not doing well," he said quietly. I froze. "What do you mean?" he exhaled. "Stage 3. Cancer." The words settled between us like a weight neither of us wanted to lift. And just like that, the war that defined 7 years became smaller than something else. Mortality. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and resignation. I hadn't seen my mother in almost 3 years. When I walked into her room, she looked fragile, smaller somehow, as if the anger she carried had burned itself out and left only ash. Her eyes widened when she saw me. For a second, something flashed across her face, surprise, maybe relief. Then guilt. "You came," she whispered. Of course I came. No lawsuit erases childhood. No betrayal deletes history. I sat beside her bed. We didn't talk about the will. We didn't talk about the trial. We talked about ordinary things. The weather. The neighbor's new dog. The garden she missed. But beneath every word was an unspoken awareness. Time was no longer unlimited. I found Daniel standing alone near the vending machines. He looked different. Not dramatically, just worn. There's a kind of aging that comes from stress, and it had settled into him. We stood facing each other like strangers who share a past. "I didn't know how to call you," he said finally. "You just did." A faint, humorless smile. Then silence again. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit he had since we were kids. "I was angry for a long time," he admitted. "At me?" I asked. "At everything," he replied. "At you. At Dad. At myself." That last one surprised me. He looked down at the floor tiles. "I convinced myself I deserved it," he said quietly. "The inheritance. I told myself you didn't care as much. That you weren't around enough." I didn't interrupt. Confession requires space. "And when you found the old will, I panicked. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about not being exposed." There it was. Not justification. Explanation. We sat in plastic chairs in the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. "I never hated you," Daniel said. "I know," I replied. Because hatred is loud. What he felt had always been something quiet or comparison. Growing up, I was the responsible one. He was the charming one. Dad trusted me with paperwork. Trusted him with laughter. Somewhere along the way, that difference became a wound. "When Dad got sick," Daniel continued, "I felt invisible again. Like you were the one he relied on. And I wanted something that proved I mattered more. The inheritance wasn't about money. It was about validation. And he chose the worst possible way to claim it. Apologies aren't cinematic. There was no dramatic speech. No swelling music. Just a quiet sentence. 'I'm sorry,' he said. Not defensive. Not conditional. Just sorry. And strangely, hearing it after 7 years didn't ignite anger. It dissolved it. Because for the first time, he wasn't protecting himself. He wasn't rewriting the narrative. He wasn't blaming me for the exposure. He was owning it. "I shouldn't have fought you," he added. "You were right." The words felt heavy. Not because I needed them, but because they cost him something to say. A week later, my mother asked to speak to me alone. Her voice trembled more from emotion than illness. "I should have stopped him," she said. The confession came without prompting. "I knew something wasn't right. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want conflict. I chose peace over truth." The same pattern? "I thought if we avoided it, it would go away," she whispered. Avoidance. That's what had shaped everything. Avoiding tension. Avoiding accountability. Avoiding confrontation. And in doing so, they created a fracture that lasted nearly a decade. "I'm sorry I made you the villain," she said. That sentence hurt more than the lawsuit ever did. Because it confirmed what I had suspected for years. They had known. Not fully. But enough. On her final evening, the hospital room was quiet. Daniel and I sat on opposite sides of the bed. Not enemies. Not quite brothers either. Something in between. Our mother looked at both of us. "Promise me," she said weakly. "This doesn't outlive me." We didn't respond immediately. Because promises about relationships are heavier than legal contracts. Finally, Daniel looked at me. And for the first time in years, there was no resentment in his eyes. Just exhaustion. "I don't want it to," he said. Neither did I. So I nodded. And that was enough. Grief changes dynamics. After the funeral, there was no dramatic reconciliation. No instant return to childhood closeness. But something subtle shifted. We started small. Occasional messages. Neutral conversations. Slow trust. Rebuilding isn't loud. It's repetitive. Consistent. Intentional. Daniel never asked for money. Never mentioned the past defensively. He didn't try to justify himself again. And that consistency mattered. Because apologies prove sincerity in the moment. Behavior proves it over time. Another 5 years passed. We're not the same brothers we were before. Maybe we never will be. But we speak. We meet occasionally. We don't pretend the fracture didn't happen. We acknowledge it. Sometimes, in quiet moments, we even talk about it openly. And strangely, the experience reshaped both of us. He became more careful with integrity. I became more careful with resentment. The inheritance that once divided us now sits mostly untouched. Invested. Practical. Unemotional. Because the real cost was never financial. It was relational. If you ask whether it was worth it, the lawsuit, the exposure, the 7 years of silence, I don't have a simple answer. Truth has a price. Sometimes that price is temporary isolation. Sometimes it's permanent damage. In our case, it was both. But here's what I know. If I had stayed silent, the lie would have become the foundation of our relationship. And foundations built on deception collapse eventually. The old will didn't just restore my inheritance. It forced everything hidden into the light. And light is uncomfortable, but necessary. Family isn't the absence of conflict. It's the willingness to face it honestly. We lost years. We lost innocence. We lost the illusion of perfection. But we gained something else. Accountability. Humility. Perspective. And maybe that was the inheritance none of us expected. Like, comment, and share this video.